I try to imagine the first time a human felt haunted. Perhaps around the time we were creating language and tools, we also created rituals for the dead, removing the flesh from the bones so they could lie clean in the earth, scattering flowers over a loved one hidden in a sacred cave, speaking aloud the names of the dead, saying goodbye. I imagine an ancestor huddled by the fire, listening to sounds of wild animals in the darkness beyond their fragile little light, feeling lonely and lost. And then a voice. Not a living voice caught on the wind, but the voices of the dead in their mind, a fleeting fragment of memory. Perhaps haunting began with someone wanting, needing one more visit from someone they loved and lost, or with someone fearing just as strongly that a person they killed is coming back for them. This is A Natural History of Ghosts. I'm Kirsty Logan. Vubeg, Denmark, 6,000 years ago. Two bodies are laid to rest, a young woman and a baby. The baby died prematurely. The woman may have died during the birth. Let's linger here. It has rained recently, and as the soil is turned, the scent of petrichor rises. The breeze is soft, but contains the first bite of snows to come. The bodies are laid in the ground, tenderly, reverently, cradled in the soft embrace of a swan's wing. The tiny baby at the center, the mother curled around it, the wing curled around them both. The swan can exist on water, on land, and in the air. Perhaps the hope was that its wing would help the dead to fly to the other world, wherever that might be. We've always wrestled with the knowledge that just as others die, so too will we. And we do this wrestling through beliefs in the afterlife and by veneration of the dead. It shows that death was not considered to be the end. If dead bodies were only bodies, there would be no swan wing, no careful burial. What we see in these bones is the preparation of souls for the life beyond. This belief in our humanity existing beyond death is seen across the world in grave goods, including precious objects, food, and ochre paint. But what becomes of the soul in the world beyond? For that, we have stories. Tales of ghosts emerge from every ancient empire. Mesopotamia, Sumeria, Babylonia, the Incan Empire, all have tales of different afterlives for different kinds of people. There are warnings of dangerous wraiths, or promises that revered ancestors could aid us from the beyond, as long as they were kept well fed. But in ancient Egypt, we didn't just write about the dead, we wrote to them, and they responded. A letter from a living husband to his dead wife. I have not garbled a spell before you, while making your name to live upon the earth. I shall lay down offerings for you when the sun's light has risen, and I shall establish an altar for you. Letters to the dead have been found right from the beginnings of the Old Kingdom, around 2600 BC, through to the late period, around 300 BC. Writing to someone in the afterlife was the same as writing to someone in another city. As the dead retained their personality and memories in the afterlife, you'd address your letter to them as you would while they were living. If you had committed no sins and had performed all the rituals properly, then your request would be heard. The dead could respond to you in a dream, through a message, or through a seer. Or you might not see a direct response, but would find your problem suddenly resolved. You might try a more threatening approach, like suggesting that if your request wasn't met, you'd stop the offerings at the tomb. This was a risky tactic. A slighted ghost could be dangerous. The ghosts of ancient Egypt were especially drawn to children. If a ghost came calling, it might place its withered, mummified lips to a child's mouth and suck away its breath. Even if the ghost didn't get that close, the child could be frightened to death at the very sight of it. To ward off these ghostly horrors, mothers made a charm out of lettuce, garlic, straw, bones, and honey. They then sang a lullaby to comfort the child and to chase off any lurking ghosts. O avaunt, ye ghosts of night, nor do my baby harm. Ye may come with steps so light, but I'll thwart you with my charm. There's nowhere in the world without tales of ghosts. Even in continents that were cut off from one another by vast stretches of ocean or uncrossable mountains, tales of the dead were told. Our ancestors shared the same hopes and the same terrors. The Native American Navajo people have lived in the southwestern United States since around 1400 BC. The Navajo believe that when a person dies, all that is good dies with them. What's left, everything bad about the person, everything they failed to bring into harmony with the universe, is gathered together and released with the person's last dying breath. This residual badness forms a ghost called a chindi. Contact with a chindi can cause illness and even death. A skilled medicine man could carry out a ritual to get rid of a lurking chindi. But, if he chose, he could also summon a chindi to right a wrong for him. A family, the Long Salts, hired a medicine man for a healing, and as payment he requested 5 butchered sheep. The Long Salts did not want to give him 5 sheep. The medicine man was blind, and one of the Long Salts tried to trick him with 5 antelope instead. The medicine man would not be tricked. He called forth a chindi on the family. One of the Long Salts fell mysteriously ill and soon died. They tried to make amends, but the medicine man died before they could reach a deal. Unfortunately, the chindi did not die with him. Within a few years, the chindi hunted down every Long Salt except one, a 16-year-old girl. She escaped with a trader, and for a while they evaded the chindi. But the winter snows set in and slowed them down. The chindi, being not of the mortal world, was unaffected by storms and soon caught up with them. The girl died, and the chindi's vengeance was complete. We have always been haunted. Just as we have lived, we have died, and our ghosts have returned. Across the ancient world, stories of ghosts emerged, and all the stories spoke to one another. No story of life beyond death exists independently of others. The Danish mother and child laid to rest on the swan's wing, the beseeching letters written to the Egyptian dead, the final Long Salt daughter trying to escape a ghost in a snowstorm. These tales are common ancestors for a pantheon of ghost stories that evolved to suit every era and culture. We still have that ancient ancestor within us. We're still staring into the fire, hoping or fearing that something remains of those who have gone. We're still trying to wrap our brains around a universe that doesn't make sense. We may think we're different now. We have different beliefs, we tell different stories. We are haunted by different ghosts. But just as humans change, adapt, and evolve, so do the ghosts. There once was a man who died. He was flesh and bones when he went into the ground, and flesh and bones when he climbed back out again. He hadn't lived a good life, and he didn't die a good death. He didn't trust his wife, so he hatched a plan. He said he was leaving town for a while, but instead hid in the rafters of their bedroom, right above the marital bed. Alas, his suspicions were proven right. In shock, he fell from the rafters and on top of his wife and her lover, dying suddenly, violently, and unfulfilled. The townspeople buried him, but he could not lie quiet. Back he crawled out of his grave, a pack of hellhounds at his heels. The townspeople knew something had to be done. They found the man back in his grave, but not as deep as he was meant to be. They unearthed him, pulled him behind black ponies to the edge of town where a pyre was already lit. He'd never lived a good life, and he hadn't had a good death, so why should things change now? The very man who had crept into his marriage bed to cuckold him thrust his hand into the dead man's chest and dragged out his cursed heart, throwing it into the flames. And that was the end of that. The dead man never walked again. This is A Natural History of Ghosts. I'm Kirsty Logan. We tend now to think of ghosts as spectral things. But in this story from the Middle Ages, the ghost is solid flesh, the revenant. He and his kind are so unspectral they can beat, rape, and kill, and are only stopped when they are wholly destroyed. To a medieval mind, the returning dead weren't such a wild proposition. Every good Christian would rise at the Last Judgment. The bad might rise a little earlier. The Revenant was born not just of Christian faith, but pagan fear, carried to the shores of Britain with invaders who took spoils but left stories. Even the bravest Viking warrior was haunted by our most basic fear: what hides out there in the dark? So the tale of a ghostly creature emerged, the Draugr. The Draugr looks just like the one you loved and lost to death, but they've come back changed, stronger, smarter, and more violent. Once, a Hebridean woman called Thorgunna was visiting Iceland when she was caught in a rain of blood and fell deathly ill. With her final words, Thorgunna requested that her body be properly buried and that her personal items be cremated. But her hosts ignored these wishes and kept her belongings for themselves. Thorgunna was dead and gone, but she laid a curse on the household. The only way her host could be free of Thorgunna was to take her body and bury it on holy ground far away. But the weather doesn't care about curses or burials, and wild storms attacked the group of men carrying Thorgunna. They were forced to take shelter with strangers. It was Icelandic custom to always feed a guest, but these strangers didn't. The men went to their beds with their bellies rumbling. They were exhausted from their travels, but still couldn't sleep, because from the pantry came the strangest sounds. They tiptoed out to investigate. There in the pantry stood Thorgunna, angry, naked, dead, and cooking a meal. The men were terrified, but also hungry. And more than that, they feared angering the Draugr more by refusing her gift. They sat at the table and ate, with Thorgunna's burning eyes watching every bite. The next day, they continued on their journey, burying Thorgunna the way she had asked. But that wasn't quite good enough. All told, 7 men died from her curse. The Draugr might kill you, but she won't let you go hungry, even if eating that meal is the last thing you ever do. A monk painstakingly paints an elaborate image, bright with colour, heavy with meaning. From the base, flickering flames rise, consuming the flesh of poor naked souls. This is the death of a life lived badly. It is labelled Hell. At the top of the page, the picture changes. A pure white tower, a group of blessed souls. Watching over it all is God, making the sign of peace. This is the death of a life lived well. It is labelled Heaven. But look closer. There's more to this picture. Caught between the fires of hell and the clouds of heaven, we find another group of souls. Below, the hellish flames just look at their heels. Above, the heavenly breezes just kiss their cheeks. Clustered together in a wooden barrel, they are hoisted by a pulley held by a friendly monk. They go from damnation to salvation. It is labelled Purgatory. With the invention of purgatory in the 12th century came a redrawing of the map of the afterlife and a transformation in the returning dead. The full-bodied spectre lost its hold. Ghosts began to grow spectral and strange. Once there was a man with the poetic name of Snowball. Riding home one evening, Snowball heard a strange sound. Looking up, he saw a crow whirling in the evening sky, a black shadow against the fading golden light. The crow tumbled to the ground, trembling. Snowball approached, then flinched back when he saw sparks flashing from the crow's spread wings. Terrified and convinced this was the devil's doing, Snowball evoked the name of God, which sated the crow for a moment. But when he tried to carry on his way, the crow launched itself into the air and knocked Snowball to the ground. What's a man to do? Snowball drew his sword to fight the crow, but when he held the hilt of his sword to his chest to form a cross, the crow transformed. Snowball commanded the strange dog to speak, and it did. Such crimes I have committed, and such agonies I suffer in purgatory. The spirit transformed again into a goat, and then the corpse of a man, stinking and rotting. Throughout all these transformations, Snowball held his nerve, speaking the prayers the spirit needed to go into death in peace. Finally, the spirit was saved and disappeared up to heaven. A revenant, still trapped in its earthly body, could never be in purgatory. If their bodies were reduced to ash to stop them rising, that meant they could never have a hope of resurrection. Now the difference was that the living could make peace with the dead. With prayer and cash donations to the church, the living could even help the dead. Rather than being at odds, the living and the dead needed one another. And what of the dead now? Do we need them still? Together, let's approach an ancient church. As we push open the carved wooden doors, worn smooth with many years of prayer, a hush falls inside us. The air smells of incense and ancient dust. Stained glass windows gleam like bright jewels. Whether we're believers or not, it's easy to be affected by a place where so many millions of people have worshipped, despaired, and rejoiced. On the wall is the image of the 3 dead kings. On the left, 3 living figures, their clothing lustrous, their faces serene. On the right, 3 skeletons, their bones ancient and weathered, their skulls baring their teeth in an endless grin. The image reminds us that beneath our borrowed finery, we're all just bones in the end. This is the memento mori, the reminder of death. As you are, so was I, the skeletons say. As I am, so shall you be. After the Middle Ages, reminders of mortality fell out of fashion. Many of the images were covered up, but they were always there, beneath the layers of whitewash, behind the furniture stacked up to hide them. We can't escape the knowledge of death, and we shouldn't want to. Because the memento mori does not have to be sad or morbid. It's not just a reminder of death. It's a celebration of life. Nothing lasts forever, not even the revenant. No one knows what comes after death. The revenant reminds us to make the most of life while we can. Just as animals and plants evolve and adapt to their environment, so too do ghosts. Ghosts and the way we tell stories about them are moulded by landscape, language, and culture. 17th and 18th century China was a turbulent time of natural disasters, peasant rebellions, catastrophic explosions, and religious conflicts. From the unique confluence of cultures in China emerged the alluring, intelligent, helpful, and pregnant ghost. This is a natural history of ghosts. I'm Kirsty Logan. There once was a man named Lian. He was ready for marriage, but his prospects were poor for one big reason, which was also very small: his penis, which was no larger than a silkworm. This meant he would father no children, ending his family line. One day, Lian met a beautiful lady dressed in white. She asked him to deliver a letter to her family on an island. Lian agreed. Night was falling on the island. The luminous moon shone across lush fields. Tigers prowled the dark, their gleaming eyes watching. Lian was afraid. Fortunately, he chanced across a house of beautiful and dainty women. Lian was entranced, not minding that the women were really fox spirits. He was invited to share a bed with the mistress of the house, named Clever. She was the daintiest and most beautiful of the women, with tiny feet and very pale skin. Lian prayed she wouldn't find out about his silkworm. But in the dark of the night, Clever slipped her hand beneath the quilt and burst into tears. The head fox, Auntie Hua, burst in and demanded to know why Clever was crying. She began to undress Lian to see the silkworm for herself, and as his clothing fell away, Auntie Hua saw the letter from the woman in white. She recognized the handwriting, her daughter, Tertia. She rewarded Lian with a magical pill that grew his silkworm. Soon after, Tertia arrived home and took Lian into her bed. She was not disappointed by what she found beneath the quilt. She told him that Clever was not a living woman, but a ghost. She died unfulfilled by her husband, who was unable to give her children. Tertia did not mind that Clever also took Lian into her bed. In fact, eventually, both had a wonderful time with Lian. Auntie Hua sent Lian home, telling him that if his love for both the ghost Clever and the fox Tertia was true, then he must do things properly and arrange to marry them. He did so, but before he could marry them, terrible news came back. Clever had died. Lian married Tertia, but never forgot Clever. One day he heard about a ghost weeping on an island beneath the luminous moon in a land prowled by tigers. Tertia revealed the truth. Clever had not died. She and Auntie Hua had abandoned her. Lian hastened to the island, where he found Clever, but she was not alone. In her arms she carried a child, handsome, sturdy, and very much alive. Lian was amazed and asked where the baby had come from. Clever said it was Lian's child, made while he was there with her. She was a ghost, but had given birth to a living child. The tale comes from the book Liao Chai Zi, or Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio, by Pu Songling. First published in 1740, it contains stories from different time periods and communities, mixing low culture and high, fact and fiction. Some of the stories focus on the everyday life of common people, but many more tell the tales of foxes, demons, and ghosts. Pu Songling is to Chinese ghost lore what the Brothers Grimm are to fairy tales, a collector of stories, one book becoming the root of an idea across generations. On a first read, it's easy to dismiss Pu Songling's erotic ghosts as a male fantasy, but the tales are numerous and slippery. Once you dive in, complex meanings emerge from the depths. And this brings us to what is perhaps unique to the Chinese tradition, the Confucian importance of ancestral worship. In an ancestor culture, wandering ghosts shouldn't exist, because the dead should be properly acknowledged and cared for. There are many ways you can make offerings to the dead, including the ancestral tablet, bearing the names of the ancestors. It's part of a shrine and a place for the family to leave offerings. It's more than an inert piece of stone. Part of the dead person's spirit is locked in the ancestral tablet. When a man dies, his name is added to the tablet. And when a wife and mother dies, her name is added alongside her husband's. But without a husband, and without producing a male heir, you don't get a tablet. If you're an unmarried woman and it looks like you're going to die without having children, you might have a special ghost marriage with a dead man who never married, so that your name could be put on his family's tablet. Or, as a last resort, you might pay to have your name added to a special tablet at a Buddhist temple. If you aren't named, you don't exist. If you don't have a tablet, you get no veneration or care after your death. The female ghost is the ghost of the gaps, lost, wild, incomplete. On a stifling summer night, several men took lodging at an inn. Boards divided their room from the next door room, but they fitted badly, leaving a gap between them. As the men got ready to sleep, a face appeared at the opening. A pretty face, with well-dressed hair and a coy expression. The men were intrigued. Suddenly the face disappeared, and in its place appeared a feminine arm, the skin soft and white. They tried to reach for the woman, but every time they came close, she was pulled out of reach. With a cold shiver, they realized that the head and the arm didn't seem to be connected to a body. The men weren't intrigued now, but alarmed. This was the work of devils. One man took a knife and crept up to the hole. When the head reappeared, he struck out with his knife. Blood spurted over the floor and wall, and the beautiful head fell down between their feet. The men were arrested for murder, but the magistrate could make nothing of the case, and no one appeared for the prosecution. After 6 months, the men were released, and the girl's head was buried. No one ever knew who she was or where she came from. In this story, the ghost bleeds. The ghost is solid. The ghost's death is classed as murder. But she has no name, no family. She's not entirely human. She's not even entire, only parts, with no body to hold them together. She's outside the kinship system, and so outside society. And although this is mainly a female problem, it's vital also for men to continue the family line. A living man can have a child with a ghost woman. But what can be done for a dead man? There was a man named Jan, whose brother and sister-in-law both died without having children. Devastated by this, Jan went out drinking. On his way home, Jan met an old classmate. They chatted and caught up, and Jan became so engrossed he forgot that his classmate had died years ago. Soon the ghost reached home. As Jan waited outside for him, he saw his sister-in-law passing by with a child who looked just like his brother. He wasn't so drunk that he didn't remember she had died, and he quickly realized everyone around him was a ghost. But even a ghost son was better than no son at all, so Jan agreed to take the ghost boy home with him. He'd grow up in his uncle's care, be able to marry and father a child. But the dead brother warned that the boy wouldn't live a long life. This turned out to be true. The boy did marry and fathered a son who could continue the family line. The order of things had been restored, and now the ghost boy could die, knowing he'd be remembered by his descendants. The pregnant ghost is a figure of adoration, fear, love, and tension between past and future. She haunts us because of her humanity and her longing to make a place for herself. In the Confucian system, these ghosts of the gaps symbolize the lost non-ancestor woman, but they also explore the idea of balance, a chance for someone lost or repressed to prove their worth and make a place for themselves. Pusongling's ghosts can symbolize gaps and fears in the 21st century, just as well as they did in the 17th. Things change over the centuries, but people still fall through the gaps, politically, economically, and culturally, as much as ever. It's why the pregnant ghost remains so powerful. Her story is one of terror, but also one of hope. She will be made whole in her life and her afterlife, even if that means bending the rules of nature and society to suit herself. The desert was not kind to the king and his band of explorers. The sun beat down relentlessly. The sand shifted in great waves beneath their feet. The harsh wind revealed the bones of those who came before. Finally, the explorers reached the walled city. Now they could rest, eat, and luxuriate. Venturing through the gate, the men found a glorious, glittering marketplace. Pearls and sapphires gleamed in the sun. Rolls of silks spilled across the ground. The rich perfumes of musk and flowers lay heavy on the air. The local traders all sat proudly in their stalls, their rich products on display. It was a scene of great beauty and luxury. Except something was wrong. The city was utterly still. Not a voice, not a step, not a breath. The men crept closer to the traders seated at their stalls. They realized that every eye was closed. Every hand was still. everyone in the city was dead. The explorers were wary, but pressed on through the silent city to the royal palace. In the courtyard at the center, a woman as radiant as the sun lay in a pearl-encrusted gown, a golden crown on her head. Finally, here was some life. The woman didn't stand as the explorers approached, but her eyes followed them, her shining gaze shifting left and right. They bowed, but the princess didn't even blink. Carefully, breath held, the king stepped closer, only to find that the poor princess was long dead. Her eyes had been backed in quicksilver to make them catch the light, giving the illusion of life. A nearby inscription revealed the truth. After the city was struck by a famine, the people were unable to save themselves. They went back to their market stalls, surrounded by finery. They went to their homes, full of everything they had worked for. They reclined on couches in their palaces, slowly dying to the sound of the gentle fountain. In the end, all their jewels and silks could not save them from their death, the end of all delights. This is a natural history of ghosts. I'm Kirsty Logan. This is not a ghost story, but it's the closest thing you'll find in 1001 Nights, a collection of Middle Eastern folktales compiled during the Islamic Golden Age of the 8th to the 14th centuries. It might seem that ghosts are the universal folklore, but the three main Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all struggle with the idea of ghosts. In the Old Testament, Moses prohibits anyone who is a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer, suggesting that ghost communication was a possibility. Judaism discourages attempting to contact the dead, but Jewish oral traditions and 16th century writings include many ghost stories. There's the Dybbuk, a malicious spirit that can possess the bodies of the living, and its flip side, the friendly Ibba. Ibba still possess the living, but usually consensually, and only because the departed soul needs to complete an important task. Islam does teach belief in the unseen, but that doesn't include ghosts as we usually think of them, the soul or spirit of a dead person coming back to the living world. In Islamic belief, souls can only return on the day of resurrection, and that has not yet arrived. In different denominations of Christian and Jewish communities, there is some ambiguity, but Islam is very clear on the matter. No ghosts. When people are told explicitly that ghosts do not, cannot exist, this should mean an extinction, the end of the line. But it's late, the end of a long day. You're walking home. The street is empty, the cooling air a relief after the day's heat. You smile, breathe deeply, glance up at the darkening sky, when you hear a strange noise. You're not worried, you walk this route often, but as you turn a corner, you stop in your tracks. In front of you, a horrifying figure, shrouded in white, arms wrapped around itself, ankles tied together. Its eyes are hollow pits in a chalk white face. Its mouth stretches wide as it flies towards you. Wait. Stay still. Open your arms. When the ghost gets close, embrace it. Then you can untie it and release it from the white shroud, and it will bring you luck and wealth. You've seen the pukang, or hopping ghost, the soul of a dead person trapped in its shroud. In traditional Malay practice, dead bodies are wrapped in a white cloth called the kain kafan. To secure the cloth to the body, strings are tied above the head, around the neck, and below the feet. But if these knots aren't undone, the body will rise from the grave on a desperate hunt for release. Walk down a street in majority Islamic Malaysia, and you might see a stand selling newspapers, magazines, and cerita hantu, or stories of ghosts. Stories of hantu are part of everyday conversation, told from mother to child, between friends, and on social media. This is how ghosts survive, by becoming a part of life. Hantu have complex relationships with humans, so much so that a whole belief culture emerged to accommodate them. If you're at a cafe with your friends, maybe they'll tell you about the hantu susu, or milk spirit, the ghost of a mother who died alongside her small child. She knocks on doors, asking for milk. If she's refused, she curses you by leaving a tombstone on your doorstep. Or maybe the hantu tetek, or breast ghost, who has large breasts that hang low on her waist, behind which she hides children she's kidnapped after they stayed out too late. Every story says something, not only the narrative on the surface, but what lies beneath. And not every story is positive or useful. Some can be regressive and damaging. The Pontianak is malicious. The Pontianak wants to eat your flesh. The Pontianak is red-eyed, pale-skinned, clad in a blood-smeared dress. She is irrational and wild. She goes where she wants and does just as she pleases, and gives no care to the civilized world of men. Perhaps she will choose to appear beautiful to attract you to her. Or perhaps she will choose to be ghoulish to scare you away from her. But she can be tamed. Drive a nail or spike into the back of her neck, and she will become a beautiful and willing servant. The perfect daughter, wife, or mother for the man who owns her. But it's a temporary servitude. Remove the nail, and she's the Pontianak again. Terrifying, malicious, and powerful, embodying all that is undesirable in women. These ghosts survive because they have a social function. The hantu susu says, "Don't be stingy with charity." The hantu tetek says, "Don't stay out too late." The Pontianak says to men, "Be honourable and don't chase women." And to women, "Be dutiful and well-behaved, or be a terrifying demon." Ghosts are a sort of social glue, holding people together, enforcing community values. Now in Malaysia, hantu are endangered not through religious stricture, but from faith in modern science. Many people see ghost stories as the old belief of past generations. And yet, they still endure, because they are still useful. A ghost story is easily shared and fun to hear, and also gives us a way to sidle up to a taboo or difficult subject we might not want to confront head-on. In the modern day, a new version of the pokong haunts us, plastic pokong. The story goes that a pregnant woman was murdered by her boyfriend, but during the autopsy, her blood kept flowing. To contain the blood, hospital staff covered her with plastic. Now she returns, her ankles and arms restrained, her body wrapped in plastic, hopping or floating towards people so they will untie her. And if they don't, she'll keep following until she gets what she wants, to finally be released, or perhaps to finally be acknowledged. We can't release the pokong or her fellow hantu anytime soon. These ghosts are just too useful, as warning, as connection, as conversation, as a way to release our fears or show our anger at injustice. They're part of the social fabric, crossing culture, faith, and generations. Across the world, throughout history, people are told that ghosts are impossible. But wait a moment. and someone will lean over and start telling you a ghost story. Impossible as they may be, they survive because we need them to. Long ago in Mexico, there lived a young woman named Maria. She was poor but very beautiful, and soon caught the eye of a handsome Spanish nobleman. They were from different worlds, not only because she was poor and he was rich, but because his people had colonized her people's land. She should hate him, but instead, she loved him. He put her up in a big house with a deep river rushing by, and visited her regularly. Soon Maria bore 2 of his children, and thought they could live happily. But as time passed, she realized his attention was waning. When he visited, he ignored her, showing affection only to the children. She knew he was falling out of love with her because she was no longer as young and beautiful as she had been. One day she found he had married a Spanish noble, a younger woman more suited to his status in society. In despair, Maria drowned their children in a river and then killed herself. But when she arrived at the gates of heaven, she was turned away. She couldn't enter the afterlife without the souls of her little ones. She was banished, condemned to wander the earth for all eternity, weeping and searching for her lost children. And if she can't find them, perhaps she'll take yours instead. This is a natural history of ghosts. I'm Kirsty Logan. We've been looking at how ghost lore has evolved. As societies change, we no longer need certain ghosts. They die off to be replaced by new ghosts that speak to our new cultural concerns. But there's an exception. La Llorona, the weeping woman. La Llorona is a shapeshifter. To naughty children, she's a boogeyman warning. Don't play near deep water, or La Llorona will get you. To wayward husbands, she's a cautionary femme fatale. Don't be seduced by strange women, or La Llorona will destroy you. To mothers, she's a there but for the grace of God. Be sure that your man will be faithful, or La Llorona is your future. Like most myths, the weeping woman has roots in people's lived reality. Between the 5th to the 19th centuries, almost 2 million Spanish people emigrated to Latin America. At first, marriages between indigenous women and Spanish men were common and accepted. But over time, as more Spanish women arrived, their status rose, and they became more desirable as wives and mothers. At the same time came the falling status of women of Mexican or mixed Mexican and Spanish descent. Often, their men cast them aside for a woman who was younger or higher status. Sometimes their children were taken away, as it was believed the indigenous mothers weren't capable of properly socializing them. La Llorona can never rest. She travels at night, sometimes on a white horse and sometimes on a black horse. She wanders waterways, rivers, streams, creeks, dressed all in white, swinging a sword or a whip. She sobs and cries, beseeching you to turn away from the devil and back to the church. Or she curses you and says you will follow her to hell. She kills her children because she's crazed with grief after her husband's sudden death, or out of anger at him kissing another woman, or in despair after he leaves her. Or she bears no blame for her children's deaths, but still must search for them. She is good and bad, God and the devil. She is an innocent victim and an evil villain. Beautiful, horrifying, mother and monster. This layering of tales is key to her longevity. The more she was seen, the more stories that were spun around her, and the more she could change. Mexico, 1897. A hot night in July. Two men were approached by a lady in a long white dress. She spoke in a whimper, like she was crying. She beseeched them to help her, but when they got closer, the men realized she was no regular woman. Her mouth was a black pit, spread wide, and inside were tiny white things. Not teeth, but rows of tiny little Euronas in white. Suddenly her mouth snapped shut, and she was lifted into the sky like a huge white bird, crying for her children. This Llorona holds herself in her own mouth. She literally contains multitudes. She began as a traitor to her people, then shifted into a figure of pity and fear. Now she shifts again. She's not only a ghost, she has given birth to ghosts. New Mexico, the 1970s. Many white people moved into the area from California. One settler in particular was unpopular with the locals, as he seemed to disrespect and misunderstand the ways of the local community, leaving gates open so the cows got out. Neighborly relations worsened when people noticed that vegetables and fruit were missing from their gardens, and suspicion fell on the new arrivals. Late one October night, when the moon was full and the dry leaves whispered in the wind, one of these new arrivals crept across a stream and into a neighbor's garden to steal food. But he noticed that the wind was really picking up, howling and crying louder and louder. Not the wind, but La Llorona. Across the stream floated the ghostly figure, howling fit to set the world on fire. The thief dropped his spoils, so terrified he couldn't even run, but crawled away as fast as he could. At every house he passed, the porch lights came on, so that everyone in the neighborhood saw him in his shame. After his encounter with La Llorona, he never stole from the local people again. La Llorona speaks in many tongues. Here, she comes in support of the Mexican diaspora, not a threat, but a defender. When the American Southwest stopped being part of Mexico and became instead part of the USA, this left some inhabitants feeling like foreigners, even though they had never left the land they had been born on. American-born Mexican people are often a double minority, speaking Spanish and practicing Catholicism in a mostly English-speaking Protestant land. The outsider status felt by many people, both from Mexico and from the US, is perhaps part of La Llorona's anguish, her betrayal, and the violence suffered by her nameless and landless children. In some tellings, La Llorona is a symbol of solidarity, a sacrifice to stop another woman sharing her fate. An elderly and beautiful nun, Sister Cleo, walked often to the local cemetery. There she placed carnations of many colours on the graves, as a memorial to those who had no one left to remember them. Each spring, when the trees blossomed, she spent back-breaking hours on her knees, weeding and tidying the areas around the graves. She bitterly missed her sisters who had died before her. When she thought no one was looking, she sat at the graves and wept. It was hard for her to cling to hope when she felt herself growing older in a changing world. On a particular afternoon, late in the day, when the sun began to dip, but the air still held its heat, Sister Cleo struggled to pull a troublesome weed. Sensing she wasn't alone, she looked up to see a tall woman dressed all in black, her face covered with a shawl. The woman wished she could join Sister Cleo in honouring her dead, but she couldn't, as her children were lost. She said, "We make our offerings to those who have gone. Although we love the dead, they can't smell the flowers we leave. We should instead save our flowers for those who can still enjoy them." Sister Cleo took her advice and saved her affection not for her dead sisters, but the ones who still lived. A powerful ancient goddess, a pitiful and scorned traitor, a way of scaring children into behaving, the scourge of wayward men, a hero to broken women. La Llorona has been all of these things, and she still is. She exists as all the things she's needed to be, without diminishing any of her conflicting identities. She's as popular and relevant as ever, a figure of beauty and danger in modern music videos, used in contemporary poetry to explore ideas of feminism and sacrifice. The image of the horrifying yet strangely beautiful child snatcher appears on coffee, t-shirts, pillows, jewellery, and even baby onesies. She's a symbol of a diaspora, as someone who has suffered, but carried on. As the world changes, La Llorona will change too, shifting and twisting into new forms as she's needed. A most adaptable ghost, and one that may never die. Judge Clark Woodruff was known as an honest man, but he had one fatal flaw. He loved women. There was a servant girl on his plantation named Chloe. She was pretty and flirty and soon caught Judge Woodruff's eye. Their affair lasted several years. Or, here's another story. A 13-year-old girl was sold into slavery, and her master decided to take her as a sex slave. If she tried to refuse, he would rape her and then punish her by making her work long hours under the blistering sun. It would be perfectly legal for him to simply beat her to death. So the girl submitted. Chloe was jealous of the love Judge Woodruff had for his wife and young children. She spent much time eavesdropping at keyholes to hear the family's private conversations. She was caught in this wickedness, and her ear was taken as punishment. Chloe didn't care. She took to wearing a glamorous turban, hanging a glitzy earring from her other ear. The girl knew that if her master's wife knew that he was raping her, she would be blamed. Terrified, she tried to glean what she could of the family's conversations to see how she could be safe. This led to further brutalities when her ear was mutilated as punishment. But Chloe was full of rage. It wasn't enough for her that she got to work inside the house in gentler conditions and with better food. She poisoned a birthday cake and fed it to Judge Woodruff's wife and children. Within days, they were dead. In a desperate act, the girl slipped some poisonous leaves into the family's food. Not enough to harm them, just to make them ill, so that she could nurse them back to health. She thought that if she could prove her value, she might not be punished. But she miscalculated, and they died. The other servants were good and obedient, unlike Chloe. They seized the wicked girl and took her. The other enslaved people were terrified that they would be punished along with her. So they were forced to take one of their own people and kill her. She haunts the house still. She can never rest. If you like Chloe's story, you can take a little piece of her home. You can buy a photo of her ghost, or a cloth doll with black fabric skin green eyes, and one gold hoop earring. At the nearby restaurant, you can enjoy Chloe's Bloody Mary. In the southern states of the USA, black ghosts are vital characters on many ghost tours. There are a few different ways of looking at ghost tours. They're history as entertainment, a safe scare with the wholesomeness of truth, or history as resource, understanding the past to make sense of the present, or history as catharsis, a sort of exorcism, a way to explore thorny, unresolved social issues of race relations and slavery, but at a safe distance. But beyond the oak groves and the gift shops, other ghosts rise up. If you were an enslaved person in the US, you might make bricks, build ships, tend gardens, milk cows, drive coaches, nurse children, construct houses, or tend crops like tobacco, indigo, or cotton. Cotton plantations were places of extreme brutality. Your living space was small and crowded. Your bed was hay or cotton. Your clothing was cheap and worn. You never had enough food. There was no escape. Even if you got past the patrolling men armed with guns and attack dogs, the surrounding land was razed to remove hiding places. You were constantly threatened with violence or familial separation. For women, there was an additional danger. In her book, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, Harriet Jacobs details in brutal detail what it's like to live under constant threat of rape. When speaking of an enslaved child's experience, she says, "Soon she will learn to tremble when she hears her master's footfall. If God has bestowed beauty on her, it will prove her greatest curse." We might imagine that this was the sort of life experienced by Chloe, the enslaved girl in the first story. But the truth is, Chloe never existed. There is no written or reliable oral indication that any of her story is real. Yet there is a version of her on many different plantation tours. She might be called Molly or Sally or Virginia. She might be 14 or 24 or 34. She might try to poison her owner or escape in the night or kill herself. She is called forth as a victim or a femme fatale or a mammy. Many plantation tours soften their language. Not slaves, but servants. Not rape, but an affair. Not a mother torn from her own children, but a loving mammy, happy to take care of her white masters. Chloe's story satisfies expectations about the hidden underbelly of plantation life, while undercutting any serious analysis of what really happened. Tourists can flirt with the danger of racial and sexual taboos, while lamenting how terrible it was back then, kept free of having to think about voyeuristic complicity in repeating these narratives. Unless you have truth in the tale, it can do more harm than good. The ghost lore of enslaved people was rich, complex, and vital for survival. In her book, Mules and Men, Zora Neale Hurston collected many superstitions concerning the dead from all over the southern USA and the Bahamas. Ghosts feel hot and smell faintish. Their voices are high and thin. Some ghosts grow very fat if they get plenty to eat. They are very fond of honey. The spirit newly released from the body is likely to be destructive. This is why a cloth is thrown over the face of a clock in the death chamber, and the looking glass is covered over. The clock will never run again, nor will the mirror ever cast any more reflections if they are not covered, so that the spirit cannot see them. There was real power in telling the story of an enslaved person returning after death. These ghosts showed that people were more than property, and that family ties were the ones that lasted after death. Ghost stories served many functions: a strengthening of community bonds, a way to keep spiritual belief alive, a psychological aid for dealing with the utmost trauma of slavery, and a grasping towards the hope of escape and some kind of justice. There is a place near St. Simon's Island, just off the Georgia coast, where the waters hold ghosts. In 1803, a slave ship transporting hundreds of stolen Igbo people docked there to wait out a storm. Their ruler, realizing the horror of his people's fate, lifted his chains and sang an ancestral song calling on the great water spirit to carry them home. As the people joined in the song, the eye of the storm passed overhead. An eerie stillness fell. Above, stars, a full moon. In the held breath of the night, the people dragged their shackles onto the deck and stepped overboard. Linked together by chains, one by one, everyone was pulled into the water to drown. As they fell, they sang, and the rattle of the chains joined their cries and echoed across the islands. Silence fell. But the dark waters began to move again. The moon disappeared behind storm clouds. The captain and crew could see nothing. On shore, trees began to bend and break. A tidal surge pulsed towards the ship. The crew tried to take shelter in the hull, where they had shackled the Igbo, breathing in the remnants of their waste, blood, and tears. The storm tore the ship apart. The mast toppled, the hull ruptured. The crew were thrown into the same waters where the Igbo had drowned. On still nights, when the moon is full, the ghosts call out, their haunting song echoing across the waters. Much of the black ghost and folklore tradition has been lost, but the stories that survive give an insight into history beyond written records and nostalgic myth-making. In the 1930s, there was an effort to preserve some stories, such as this one, recounted by Emmeline Hurd from a story told by her mother. A woman escapes from a plantation after being whipped. She is desperate, bleeding. The bright moon lights her path. She is terrified of being caught and beaten again. And her terror grows when she has to pass a cemetery where it's said a local slave owner used to whip enslaved people to death and bury them. But her only options are to return to enslavement or continue running. So she runs. As she approaches the cemetery, she sees an impossible thing. A huge industrial machine in motion, circling the graves, as large as a house, an amalgam of chains and wheels mangled together, its movement deafening and endless. The ghost here is slavery, the monstrous industrial machine that consumed so many lives. The US, the UK, and many other countries are full of the physical evidence of slavery, but we rarely talk about the reason it's there. Instead, we use ghosts as emotional truth, though not literal truth. If we need a black ghost story, we could tell one that isn't designed to sell dolls and cocktails. There are real horrors to be confronted, real wounds still open and bleeding, real ghosts that still haunt the land. Now that we're having some sort of a reckoning, perhaps new ghost stories will emerge, ones with the power of reality and the transformation that truth can bring. Deep night, a sleeping house. But Mary Jane Hester could find no peace. Perhaps, she thought, the mother of a murdered daughter can never find peace again. Her daughter's killer would walk free. Another woman would die at his hands. Another mother would lie sleepless. And there was nothing Mary Jane could do about it. But in that dark and troubled night, there was another woman who could find no rest. Another woman who wanted justice. Suddenly, beside Mary Jane's bed, stood her daughter, wearing the dress she died in. After a few moments, the ghost turned to leave. But as her body faced the door, her head turned right around and stared back at her mother. Her neck was broken. Words emerged from her twisted throat. "Mama, he killed me. Mama, Erasmus killed me. He killed me. He killed me." In Greenbrier County, West Virginia, USA, there is a trail marker with the following emblazoned on it. Interred in nearby cemetery is Zona Hester Shue. Her death in 1897 was presumed natural until her spirit appeared to her mother to describe how she was killed by her husband, Edward. Autopsy on the exhumed body verified the apparition's account. Edward, found guilty of murder, was sentenced to the state prison. Only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped convict a murderer. In the late 1890s, Elva Zona Hester, age 23, met and married Erasmus, not Edward as the sign stated, Stribbling Trout Shue. 3 months later, Erasmus sent a young boy to his house to collect the eggs from the chicken coop and ask his lovely new bride if she needed anything brought home when work was done. The boy lifted the straw, but could find no eggs. He went into the house to try to find Zona. And find her he did, splayed at the bottom of the stairs, dead. The boy raised the alarm, and the doctor, George W. Knapp, was summoned. He had been treating Zona for female trouble. Dr. Knapp tried to examine Zona's body, but by then, Erasmus had appeared, clinging desperately to her, stopping anyone from getting close. Zona's cause of death was listed as everlasting faint. How Erasmus wailed, how he fussed and raged as the funeral approached. How dare anyone try to touch his beloved wife? How dare they try to move even a single piece of her clothing? Local custom and the rule of law be damned. No one but him would go near Zona. Even when Zona was put in her coffin, Erasmus fussed. He propped her up carefully, protecting her neck, preventing anyone from disturbing her. No one fully examined Zona's body. She was buried, and her husband walked away. Mary Jane had taken an instant dislike to her daughter's beau. Erasmus was not what any mother would dream for her daughter. He drifted from job to job, spending time in jail for horse theft, and time out of jail beating his previous wife. Much of what Mary Jane saw as suspicious behaviour, Erasmus presented as the devotion of a devastated widower. But Mary Jane looked beyond what Erasmus wanted her to see. Why was Zona found lying on her back at the bottom of the stairs? Why were the women prevented from preparing her body for burial? Why would he allow no one else to close the coffin? Why was Zona wearing that high-necked dress, that bonnet, those scarves around her throat? Questions, but no evidence. There were no witnesses, and Erasmus had no intention of confessing. Brazenly, he even commented to several people that no one could prove he did it, if he did. Mary Jane had heard the rumours that he'd killed a previous wife. Here was the same story all over again. A young bride, a sudden death, an unexamined body. A man free to move on to the next poor woman. Mary Jane went to the prosecutor to ask for her daughter's body to be properly examined before her burial. But she was easily dismissed. She was grieving. It was nerves. She was hysterical. No one would listen to Mary Jane, but perhaps they would listen to Zona. After her daughter's visitation, Mary Jane went back to the prosecutor and told him the story. How Zona had appeared in the bedroom and the way her head had turned around as if her neck was broken. The prosecutor didn't take the story at face value, but Mary Jane kept trying. Finally, her persistence won him over. Zona's body was exhumed and re-examined. Zona's neck was dislocated, the ligaments torn, the windpipe crushed at the front of the neck. These injuries could not possibly have been caused by a fall, as Erasmus had suggested. Someone had strangled Zona. June 1897, the murder trial of Erasmus Shue. Mary Jane Hester took the stand and told of her daughter's visits. She never used the word ghost. She came back and told me that he was mad that she didn't have no meat cooked for supper. She came 4 times and 4 nights, but the second night she told me that her neck was squeezed off at the first joint. Erasmus's defense counsel asked Mary Jane over and over, "Was it a dream? You're sure it wasn't a dream? You do know they were only dreams." Over and over came the reply, "No. No, I don't dream when I'm wide awake. No, I am not superstitious. No, I do not lie." Finally, the verdict came in. Guilty. There's a long storytelling tradition of wronged ghosts. We need only think of the ghost of Hamlet's father decrying his foul and most unnatural murder, leading to Hamlet seeking revenge. Over 50 years before Zona's murder, there was a celebrated case in England. Maria Martin waited for her lover William at a remote barn. He'd promised to elope with her, but when William sauntered back into town, Maria wasn't with him. Months passed. Maria's stepmother, Anne, spoke of strange dreams. Maria, dead, buried under the barn, calling to her from beyond the grave. Maria's father investigated and found a decomposing skeleton. Tightly wrapped around its neck was a green handkerchief, which belonged to Maria, a gift from William. Another young woman murdered by her lover, another mother visited by her ghost, leading to the discovery of vital evidence. So famous was it that the story was played out on the music hall stage, in pamphlets and in ballads. So, was Zona's ghost a truth or a lie? Author and historian Katie Letcher-Lyle gives us a new angle on the story. The newspaper issue that published Zona's obituary also reported another piece of news, a famous murder case from Australia. A man was murdered and thrown into a pond, the crime only discovered after many locals said they'd seen his ghost sitting by the pond. Years later, a dying man made his final confession. He had witnessed the crime occurring, but feared giving evidence in case the killer came after him too. So he created a story of a ghost, placing it where he knew the body would be found. The ghost was a lie to get to the truth. Murder is always a popular story. The innocent victim, the evil killer, the eventual justice. We consume these narratives in their thousands across podcasts, radio, film, TV, books, and games. Because we want answers. We want to see justice served, even when, especially when, justice seems unlikely. But we know that doesn't always happen. So we hope for a force beyond flawed human justice, an undeniable voice of truth. The Telltale Ghost articulates what we know but can't say. Mama, he killed me. It will forever haunt us. Mama, Mama. Hydesville, New York, 1848. 14-year-old Maggie Fox and her 10-year-old sister Kate lived with their parents in a house with a reputation for being haunted. One March night, icy rain battered the roof and a frozen wind screamed around the walls. But there was something else. The family were terrified. Was it ghosts, intruders, wild animals? But as the rapping continued, their fear faded and intrigue grew. They called the thing making the sounds Mr. Splitfoot. Kate, the younger daughter, snapped her fingers. Mr. Splitfoot, do as I do. He was asked to rap out the ages of Mrs. Fox's daughters, which he did, including one who had died. Over the next few days, the Fox sisters worked on a communication code. Mr. Splitfoot could answer yes or no. Mr. Splitfoot told them he was a peddler who had been murdered and buried in their cellar. The girls began holding seances in their house, with the rapping ghost performing admirably every time. The fame of the Fox sisters soon spread. They moved to the big city of Rochester, New York. There they began their career as mediums. The Victorians delighted in ghost stories and fairy tales, legends of strange gods and spirits. This interest seems perhaps logical, as the material world they inhabited seemed almost supernatural. 1826 brought the invention of photography. 1844, the telegram. 1876, the telephone. And in the 1890s, radio. Suddenly, there were disembodied voices emerging from machinery. Spoken words could travel across the planet almost instantly. If someone died, an image of them could be preserved forever, as if they lived on. Every day was a haunting. And a new faith emerged, spiritualism, based on the following beliefs. The spirits of the dead exist, they want to communicate with the living, and they can. Some argue that spiritualism was a feminist movement, as practitioners called for the recognition of women's rights. Young women at the time didn't have many options, but spiritualist culture held possibilities for attention, opportunity, and status. There was also the appeal of sidestepping rigid class and gender norms without directly contradicting the status quo. When she was 14, in 1870, something strange began to happen to Florence Cook. A spirit began knocking. She found she could communicate with the spirit, and using a system of yes or no raps, the spirit told her she was a medium. Within a year, Florence's star had begun to rise, and reports of her powers appeared in the spiritualist press. Victorian culture considered women to have a fragile nature, making them vulnerable to physical, emotional, and spiritual influence. Trances and faints were not unnatural for women. A true woman was seen as one who held 4 cardinal virtues: domesticity, piety, purity, and submissiveness. Florence Cook's seances were elaborate affairs. Everyone gathered in the dimly lit parlour, watching as Florence was bound by ropes. She then went to an adjoining room, screened off by a thin curtain. Everyone waited, breath held, hands linked around the table. A figure appeared in the room, dressed all in white, her beautiful face glowing. Florence's spirit guide, Katie King. Mediums both were and were not in control. By communicating with the spirits, mediums became merely channels, giving up their own autonomy. The usual etiquette of personal space and manners shifted a little. You could hold hands with the spirit. She might even caress your face or sit in your lap. The physical form of the spirit must be examined closely by learned men to make sure she is genuine. It was, in the opinion of chemist and physicist Sir William Crookes, the duty of scientists to make such investigations. A letter by Sir William Crookes. Having seen so much of Katie lately when she has been illuminated by the electric light, I am enabled to add to the points of difference between her and her medium. Katie's height varies. In my house, I have seen her 6 inches taller than Miss Cook. Katie's neck was bare last night. The skin was perfectly smooth, both to touch and sight, whilst on Miss Cook's neck is a large blister. Miss Cook's hair is so dark a brown as almost to appear black. A lock of Katie's, which is now before me, and which she allowed me to cut from her luxuriant tresses, is a rich golden auburn. I timed Katie's pulse. It beat steadily at 75, whilst Miss Cook's pulse a little time after was going at its usual rate of 90. On applying my ear to Katie's chest, I could hear a heart beating rhythmically inside. Florence wasn't the only one holding seances, but hers was some of the most popular. Fellow medium Agnes Guppy was a stout, middle-aged woman and was greatly irked by the success of pretty 16-year-old Florence. Mrs. Guppy hatched a plan. She couldn't attend one of the seances as she'd be recognized. She persuaded her husband to prove that Katie King was no spirit, but Florence Cook in disguise. The seance was underway. Florence was tied with ropes in the next room, and Katie had appeared. She walked around the room, smiling at the attendees, answering their questions, telling her stories. But as the spirit Katie neared one man, he seized her by the waist and wouldn't let go. There was chaos. Others leapt in to remove his hands from the struggling Katie. The gas lamps went out, and by the time they came back on, Katie had disappeared, and Florence was found, still secured by her ropes. The man was removed, possibly regretting his actions, for in the midst of the scuffle, Katie had yanked out part of his beard and badly scratched his face. That wasn't the end of Florence Cook and Katie King, but it wasn't the end of the controversy either. Debates raged, all of which merely heightened the celebrity of both spirit and medium. This celebrity culture merged with the popularity of science. Many famous intellectuals of the day attended seances and demonstrations, including Arthur Conan Doyle, author of the Sherlock Holmes books. This gave mediums a further opportunity to increase their fame. Attempting to capture a likeness of Katie, Florence held a series of photographic sittings with reporters and scientists. As part of his investigation of Florence, William Crookes took a total of 44 photos of Katie. Conan Doyle wrote, "This resulted in 44 negatives, some inferior, some indifferent, and some excellent. The favourite was one which shows Crookes at the height of his manhood, with this angel, for such in truth she was, leaning upon his arm. The word angel may seem an exaggeration, but when an otherworld spirit submits herself to the discomforts of temporary and artificial existence in order to convey the lesson of survival to the material and worldly generation, there is no more fitting term." In New York, the Fox sisters were successful for a long time. But by the late 1800s, it all fell apart. Maggie revealed the trick. When we went to bed at night, we used to tie an apple to a string and move the string up and down, causing the apple to bump on the floor. Or we would drop the apple on the floor, making a strange noise every time it would rebound. They also admitted to cracking the joints of their knuckles and toes to make ghostly banging sounds. Both sisters died in relative poverty, their reputations ruined. They weren't the only angels to end up disgraced or destitute. Katie King had often stated that she could not appear on this earth beyond the month of May 1874. When that date arrived, the room was filled with bouquets of flowers, and an intimate séance was arranged with Katie's closest admirers. When Katie manifested, Florence tearfully begged her to stay a little longer, but she replied, "My dear, I can't. My work is done. God bless you." And with that, Katie disappeared. Florence's final end was not quite so romantic. She died in poverty at the age of 48. But that wasn't the end of Katie, or of spiritualism. Despite the curtain call, Katie King went on to appear for others across the world, and became more in demand than her mediums. She eventually evolved into the parlour ghosts now conjured by mediums and TV psychics. Because every time one faker is exposed, another, apparently genuine this time, takes their place. This is the legacy of this particular stage of ghost evolution. A desperate, undying hope that the next knock will be real. As Henry James said, "If you wish to upset the law that all crows are black, you mustn't seek to show that no crows are. It is enough if you prove one single crow to be white." Autumn 1931. The Isle of Man. A remote, impoverished farm. Vori Irving is 12 years old, and something is inside her house. Vori and her parents hear it blowing, spitting, and growling from inside the walls. Vori's father Jim tries setting traps and laying down poison, but the sounds persist. The thing makes a noise like a baby or a dog. Then it begins to talk. Vori recites nursery rhymes and it repeats them. It likes to sing or bounce a rubber ball in time to music from the gramophone. Sometimes it brings home rabbits it has strangled. Only Vori sees the thing. She describes a strange creature. Yellowish fur, a flat snout like a hedgehog, a long bushy tail. The thing in the walls is a poltergeist, a noisy ghost. And he's also a mongoose. The mongoose says he is named Jeff. He was born in Delhi in 1852, and he is an extra clever mongoose. Jeff's fame spreads. The tabloids pick up on the story, making it a source of fascination and derision across the world. Vori is teased mercilessly at school. The house is inundated with reporters and parapsychologists demanding to investigate her claims. This opens up the family, and especially isolated, shy Vori, to scrutiny by a whole world of strangers. Once a door is opened, it can be difficult to close, even if we try. Jeff was something of the prototype for the 20th century poltergeist story, but he didn't come from nowhere. In the 16th century, Martin Luther was a professor of theology, a composer, a priest, and a seminal figure in the Protestant Reformation. He was also the first recorded person to write about poltergeists. He detailed various types of Geister or spirit. Poltergeister translates as noisy spirit. The poltergeist was seen as an invader, a demonic entity. That is, until the 19th century development of parapsychology. Here was the change. Previously, poltergeists were thought of as demonic, outside the human body, a matter of theology. But religious belief was in decline in the West, and belief in psychoanalysis was on the rise. Now supposed poltergeist activity was said to come from within a living being, the psyche made physical. For the brand new breed of parapsychologists, the 20th century poltergeist was ideal. The hauntings happened in daylight and could be properly observed. There were records, diaries, eyewitness accounts from credible witnesses, and physical phenomena that could be recorded by new audio and video technologies. What's generally at the centre of a poltergeist case? A teenage girl. In the mid-20th century, teenagers were fairly new in the public consciousness. But by the 1960s and 70s, at the height of parapsychology, it was all about the teenager. Before this, the bridge between childhood and adulthood didn't really have its own name. Suddenly, teenagers were at the centre of music, film, and fashion. Trends and products were marketed specifically to them. And with this increased attention came an appreciation of the adolescent mind and the idea of troubled children. Scotland, 1960. An 11-year-old girl was uprooted from her home in Ireland and moved to a new school and a new home. The girl was shy, but sometimes would enter a dissociated state when she would speak about her life in Ireland and lose much of her ordinary shyness, chatting away freely. The rest of the time, she stayed quiet. One November evening, the family heard a strange sound from upstairs. A ball bounced from the girl's bedroom, down the stairs and into the living room, but they could see nothing there. The next evening, a heavy sideboard slid across the floor. Later, when the girl was in bed, the knocking began. On the walls, on the ceiling, over and over with no apparent cause. 2 local ministers and 2 local doctors investigated. As they watched the girl lying in her bed, they saw a curious rippling movement pass across her pillow. Later, one of the doctors again visited. He brought his dog. And the girl was much taken with it, saying she missed her own dog back in Ireland. She passed into a trance, calling out for her dog. When another man arrived to check on her, the girl cried out and struck about with her fists. She only fell quiet when both men left her room. The next day at school, the girl was alone in the classroom with her teacher when a blackboard pointer lying on the table began to vibrate and travelled across the table until it fell off. The girl was standing with her hands behind her back, not touching anything. While the pointer was moving, the teacher put her hand on the table and found that it too was vibrating. One end suddenly swung round. The girl began to cry and said that it was not her. The doctors returned to the girl's bedroom. They tape-recorded the rappings, sawing, and ripplings of the bedsheets. The girl talked throughout in what the men described as an uninhibited and hysterical way. All of this happened over the course of only a few days. Then the phenomena faded to nothing. Although the teacher and the other children knew what was happening, they played the events down, protecting the girl from the reporters and curiosity seekers pursuing her. This story follows a familiar track. A young girl, intelligent but lonely, in a difficult family situation. But it's unusual because her family and community protected her. 3 months after the strange phenomena first occurred, she was said to be happier and more outgoing than before. She had her beloved dog back, and much of her previous tension had gone with the ghost. But what happens if a haunted girl isn't so lucky? Enfield, 1977. 11-year-old Janet reported knocks on the walls and furniture shifting without anyone touching it. As events progressed, the haunting centered on the body of Janet herself. She fell into trances, and a deep demonic voice emerged without her opening her mouth. The voice swore, sang nursery rhymes, and told reporters to shut up. Janet said that she was being used by the poltergeist. It took its toll on her. Her trances became more violent. Once, her mother allegedly had to intervene when, during one of these trances, Janet wrapped herself in a curtain and the fabric tangled around her throat, pulling tight. The investigators came. The reporters came. The attention was relentless. Over 2 years, there were over 2,000 separate reports by over 30 eyewitnesses. Documentaries were made about Janet and her poltergeist. There were dramas, films. The story is still being told and retold. 50 years have passed, but the attention has not waned. For Janet, thankfully, the physical phenomena did eventually fade away, but not before the media attention wreaked destruction on the people involved, only to drop them and move on to a new story. This potentially leaves the haunted girl forever trapped in that time, forever a child, forever in violent trances, observed by strangers in her bedroom, speaking in a stranger's voice. Jeff the mongoose eventually disappeared. By the time a book was published about the case, he fell silent. The Irvings sold their house at a loss due to its haunted reputation. Jeff didn't follow them, nor introduce himself to the new owner. Vori Irving only ever gave one interview. She said of Jeff, "I wish it had never happened. He made me meet people I didn't want to meet. And Jeff has even kept me from getting married. How could I ever tell a man's family about what happened?" What is almost always missing from parapsychology accounts is the voice of the person, usually young, usually a girl, at the center of it. Vori is always filtered through observers. Here, where she briefly speaks for herself, she does not deny what happened. She only wishes it never had. With these stories, there's no catharsis, no ending, no explanation. A troubled mind cries for help, but they don't get it. Instead, the world swarms in. The rest of the family is drawn in, then the community, then the investigators and the media. All of us get sucked in. We feed the poltergeists. We create new trauma for the already traumatized. At best, the person at the center of it all is playing a trick. At worst, they've been through a terrifying experience, often publicly, that they can't explain. In the end, it's not the ghost that follows and haunts them, but the story. Nikola Tesla was working in his laboratory. It was late. Everyone else had gone home for the night. Yet he couldn't rest. Tall, thin, and meticulously groomed, Tesla was well known as an inventor and engineer. He spoke 8 languages and had an incredible visual imagination. He was a vital contributor to the modern electricity supply system and experimented with wireless lighting, a steam-powered oscillating generator, and X-ray imaging. But tonight, he had a different sort of experiment in mind. After tinkering with a crystal radio powered with electromagnetic waves, Tesla found that strange and unexplained voices emerged. He wrote in his diary, "The sounds I am listening to every night at first appear to be human voices conversing back and forth in a language I cannot understand." He was initially convinced that the voices were inexplicable, perhaps supernatural. He later wrote, "There must be a more simple explanation that has so far eluded me." In the 20th century, ghosts began to shrink. As they evolved to suit the changing world, they grew smaller and less visible, from full-body hauntings and corporeal figures to shadows on photographs to tiny white orbs. Tell someone that you saw a ghost walking towards you in a white shroud, and it's unlikely they'd take it at face value. But a whispered voice, barely heard. Perhaps that's a different story. Sweden, 1959. Friedrich Jürgensen, a painter and film producer, was out alone in the woods recording bird songs. But when he later listened to the tape of what was meant to be a Swedish finch, he heard human voices. Thinking there must be some fault in his equipment, he went back and did more recordings, thousands, over several years. He believed he heard his dead father, his dead mother, and his dead wife calling his name. Jürgensen's collection pales beside that of Latvian doctor Konstantin Radiv, who by 1969 had amassed over 100,000 tape recordings of the dead. He claimed to have established contact with Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, and many others. His technique, which he called electronic voice projection, or EVP, wasn't a conversation in the way we might think of them. Here's how it works. You set up a tape recorder and leave it running, recording silence. You ask your questions into the silence, leaving a sufficient pause for a response. Later, you listen back to the recording. Through the mush and static, if you listen very carefully, you may be able to just make out people speaking.
Yeah.
You can also try listening to the white noise of certain radio bands and wait for voices to emerge. Pareidolia is the normal human tendency to see logical shapes where none exist. Think of figures in clouds. Auditory pareidolia is when we hear messages or spoken words in the noise of air conditioners or fans, or in music played backwards. EVP recordings are usually very short, just a few words, and very unclear, leaving many to include them in the category of auditory pareidolia. As the decades passed, we didn't stop wanting to hear the voices of the dead. Now, hundreds of people claim that their electronic devices are haunted or possessed. Some even discuss receiving text messages and emails from the dead. In 2014, a new post appeared on a discussion forum. My dead girlfriend keeps messaging me on Facebook. The poster wrote that his girlfriend died 2 years ago, and he'd started getting messages from her. They consisted of phrases recycled from messages she'd sent him when she was alive. Random repetitions. OMG cinnamon candles. Garage door. Nah, different. A kind of word soup, which became eerily more structured as time went on. Cold, cold, cold. Please stop. Cold. I don't know what's happening. Then her account started tagging her in photos, sitting or standing where she would be if she hadn't been dead by then. He tried changing the passwords. He complained to Facebook. He made sure none of his friends were playing a sick joke. The post ended with him saying, "I just heard a Facebook alert. I'm too afraid to swap windows and check it." The post went viral, receiving almost 7,000 comments, and people still share it as a real story. But the fact is, it was just a well-written fiction on No Sleep, a Reddit forum for sharing spooky stories. But in the 21st century, we don't need to make up stories about the dead speaking. We don't need to try to capture ghosts in machines. Our machines are already haunted. Many people save phone numbers, voicemail messages, or texts from loved ones who have died. Our phones are a way to communicate with the living, but they're also little boxes we carry around with us that can hold the voices of the dead. Modern-day reliquaries, digital urns. Hello, it's me. Your phone's obviously in the other room on silent again, so... Yeah, I'm telling her. I know, it's the voicemail. So we wanted to see, do you want to come and stay with us for the holidays? Yeah. Why aren't you here? You should be here. You said you were going to be here. We're going to leave. And I just want you to know that. I want you to remember how proud we are. The thing about ghosts is that, although we ache to speak to them, They can't speak for themselves. All we can have is an echo. John James Vlahos was dying of stage 4 lung cancer. His son, James, recorded many hours of his father speaking. He wanted to capture John's cadence, his word choices, the way he conveyed his thoughts and feelings, the unique voice of his father. John described his boyhood cave exploring, his college job loading ice blocks onto train boxcars. All told, James recorded over 90,000 of his father's words. Soon after, John died. James mourned. He would never be able to see his father again, never have a conversation with him, never be able to tell him news and hear his response. He didn't have his dad anymore, but he did have Dadbot. Dadbot, an AI chatbot that could communicate using John's speech patterns and syntax. James knew that Dadbot could never be more than mimicry, just a shadow of his real father, with his living human contradictions and surprises. Still, James had figured out a way to almost do what many millions of humans have wanted to do for centuries: speak to the dead and hear them reply. From the ancient Egyptian letters to the dead, to Victorian spiritualism, to Dadbot. We change, technology changes, but our desire to be haunted never does. I try to imagine the last time a human felt haunted. I imagine someone huddled by the light of their laptop or phone screen, feeling lonely and lost. And then, a voice.
Remember how proud we are.
A fleeting fragment of memory, not just in their mind, but in their device. The voices of the dead, speaking. Maybe this is the latest ghost, but certainly not the last. We are still yearning to speak to those we've loved and lost. Still fearing that gone doesn't really mean gone. Still trying to wrap our brains around a universe that doesn't make sense. But what is a ghost? We could say it's a visual or audio remnant of a person who was once alive, often making their presence known by repeating actions they did or phrases they said in their life. In writing and recording this series, I have made myself a potential ghost. These episodes could exist long after I'm dead. If they wanted to, people who weren't even born in my lifetime could hear my own words in my own voice. To them, I'll never be anything but a ghost. Someday, all of us will be ghosts. At the birth of the 20th century, the goal was to capture a ghost in a machine. Now, millions of us share our words, our voices, our faces online. When we're gone, they'll presumably live on. The people reading, listening, or looking at us might not even know that we're dead. If you like the idea of Dadbot, you can make yourself a bot. The website hereafter.ai will record your life story and build your voice avatar. After you're gone, your friends and descendants can use an app to chat with you. All this sharing, all this commenting and connection, it's a new psychological reaction to the very primal concerns that led to the birth of ghost lore, all the way back around that campfire in the dark. Now, we don't have to wait to be haunted. We are creating our own ghosts, the ghosts of ourselves.